Welcome to 1000 Ways to be a Champion for Children. We are coming at you from Lethbridge, Alberta, the ancestral home of the Blackfoot Nation. And I have for my guest today, Martin Thompson. Martin Thompson with the City of Lethbridge. He is on a mission. He is on a huge project, the biggest in his career, biggest and boldest in his career, about the CWSS. Martin, tell us about that.
Okay, well, again, thank you, Alan, for having me today. Again, I work for the City of Lethbridge, and my portfolio is community social development. And really, at a high level, my job is to implement the City of Lethbridge social policy, which is to create a city where we achieve a healthy and well and safe community for all of our individuals and families to live in. Now, the policy itself that the City of Lethbridge has is solid policy, but it's how do you implement that? You know, if you think about it, my job is to alleviate social issues. Well, if I do it, it'll be the first time in the history of the world that this has been done.
Marty, I got to say, I'm shocked you haven't got this looked after yet. Like, what the hell?
And so, you know, my job is to implement the social policy. Now, the city has funding that they give or provide to address social issues, but the vast majority of it comes from the federal and provincial government through grants that they give to municipalities. So it's our job as a city to shepherd those grants, allocate those monies to alleviate our social issues. And so when I came into this portfolio, you know, I'm not an expert in social issues. I am an administrator. That's my job. And, you know, anytime, you know, when you look at any city, and it's defined as there's an acronym called a smart city. And a smart city is defined as a city that has a strong physical infrastructure, which are your roads, your bridges, water treatment plants. We need all of those to be a strong city. And then the second pillar is our institutional infrastructure, which are our schools, our hospitals, our post-secondary institutions, all of those institutions, again, to create a strong city. And the third pillar, and which is always overlooked, is the social infrastructure, right? Now, communities will spend tremendous dollars and effort to make sure that they have a strong physical and institutional infrastructure. But again, we often forget that social infrastructure. We'll plan out a community and roads and schools 30 years in advance, right? And we'll spend tremendous dollars developing strategies to make sure it's done right. And I got to tell you, Lethbridge does a great job. We have a great physical infrastructure and institutional infrastructure. You know, look at our post-secondaries, very strong. But, you know, coming into this portfolio, what stunned me is there is no social strategy, no social infrastructure strategy. We'll put social infrastructure in an area or location and make that decision in 2 weeks and wonder why we have uproar and why we have issues and problems. And so, you know, I went to council and I said, we need, like the other infrastructures, we need a strong social infrastructure. And to do that, you need a strategy, just like the other areas. And any strategy starts with a good needs assessment. You need to define the problem before you try and define the solutions or the strategy. And so we started out and we did a very, very robust, took about 18 months to do a needs assessment. And we pulled a good needs assessment typically is you do extensive research and then extensive stakeholder engagement. And so for the research part, we pulled data from every level of government, from health systems, from the police. We pulled from social service providers. Everywhere we could get that data, and we cross-referenced it, and we dug into it. And then we did extensive stakeholder engagement, where we did multiple public questionnaires, where we did over 300 community consultations, where we did workshops, we did focus groups, we did one-on-one interviews, group interviews, all to bring nuance to that data, right? And so in the perfect world, the data matches the stakeholder engagement. So in other words, the stakeholders are seeing and feeling the same thing that the data is telling you, right? Which is it's a good. And that's what happened here. And the data was telling us, hey, listen, Lethbridge, you have social problems, right? It was very clear to say, and again, you can go online. All of those documents are there, part of the community well-being and safety strategy for everybody to see. It's a 124-page needs assessment for people to actually go through and see exactly what the issues are. And some key findings were that, you know what? We're not a small town anymore. We're 100,000 people. We are now the third largest city in Alberta, and we are urbanizing, okay? We can no longer call our buddy Bob up and have coffee and solve all the problems, okay? We're too big for that. And, and the other interesting thing is we're a hub city to over 340,000 people, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So these folks come to Lethbridge for healthcare, education, business, entertainment, but also social services. And we border the largest reserve in Canada. So it's not a shocker that, people will come to our community for all of those pieces, including social services. Okay. And so, we're a growing and diverse city. We have a very high senior population. We have a very high Indigenous population. We have some other unique characteristics of Lethbridge are that we have the highest percentage of people in Alberta that have disabilities, mental, physical, and cognitive disabilities. So then from a basic need perspective, we found out, of course, we have very high poverty rates. We have one of the highest child poverty rates in Canada. We have a housing affordability and homelessness problem. And people always say, well, Marty, we have one of the lowest rents in Canada, and our house prices are very low. You're absolutely right. The problem is not the price of our rent and our houses, it's the affordability. What they don't realize is Lethbridge, our household income is about $35,000 less than the provincial average. So we have a lot of very, very poor folks, very poor households living in our city.
Mm-hmm.
And even though our rent and our home prices are low, we have a housing affordability problem. And then from a social issue perspective, our domestic violence rates are almost 3 times the provincial average. As we all know, we have a very, very severe addiction issue in Lethbridge, very high mental health issues, which is common in Alberta. And all of those have contributed to homelessness. So the number one cause of homelessness is drug and substance abuse, okay? And we all know that we do have a substance abuse and addiction problem in Lethbridge. And all of that has put a tremendous amount of pressure on our police. So, so we took all that data and we created a strategy. But before we did that, we also mapped all of the historical community safety and well-being efforts in Lethbridge for the last 10 years. What worked? What didn't work? Right? It's always good to look at the historical pieces and learn, right? And even if something didn't work, that's okay, because you learn from the mistakes.
Sure.
It's some of the best information you can get.
Sure.
And then we also did what we call social asset mapping. So the city of Lethbridge often gets blamed for all of the social issues, but in reality, the mandate to address them, the city of Lethbridge has very little control or mandate. Addiction and mental health is a provincial mandate, right? So a lot of the social issues are, for lack of a better term, not the mandate of the city of Lethbridge to solve. But we know if we don't work hard to create those strategies and policies, we can't expect the Alberta government or the federal government to come down and dip into our city to do it for us. So somebody has to show some leadership to do this work. So we did social asset mapping and said, okay, this is a community problem that requires a community solution. And so we mapped all of the social assets in the city of Lethbridge. And that was a bit shocking for me personally, because we identified over 6,000, 1,500 programs and about 6,000 social services. And so we have a lot of really hardworking, passionate programs and people. And it's about how do we, as a city or government, how do we support them to provide an infrastructure, a strategy, and a system to coordinate some of those efforts and dollars to achieve collective impact. And so we took all of that work and we presented it on a number of occasions to all of our key stakeholders. We invited.
Marty, can I just interject with one question? I want your clarity on this, because I this is how I see it, and I want you to tell me if I'm wrong.
Okay.
When we talk about 6,000 agencies that are trying to deliver these 1,500 programs in our city, right? And there's duplication that occurs, of course, and there's gaps that occur because nobody's talking to each other. And I know a lot of times you talk to people in the community and they say, hey, all these agencies, they're trying to create their own little empires, and it's a competition, they're fighting with everybody else. And maybe there's some of that occurs, but I think at the origin, when one of these 6,000 agencies was created in our city, it's because caring people said, here's a problem, we want to address it. It wasn't because, hey, there's a grant available, let's go get it.
Absolutely.
Like, this is what we want to do. And so now it's just, they haven't had the communications. Everybody's got busy lives. And this is kind of creating those conversations and creating that synergy and determining who does what best, right?
You're absolutely right. Again, these are hardworking people. These are very passionate, good organizations. And I always say, it's really the government that has created this fragmentation. So to give you a very specific example, the University of Calgary School of Public Policy did an in-depth study on homelessness. And they determined that in Canada, in 2018, there were 167,000 programs and services being delivered by government or nonprofit to address homelessness alone. And the cost, the money being spent, was $33.5 billion. Now, anybody can go to the University of Calgary School of Public Policy and read that document. It's astonishing. And again, the key funders for all these programs are the different levels of government. But they're not talking to each other. They're not communicating. And so it's easy to blame the nonprofits, but in reality, it's the governments that aren't putting a system in place to coordinate the services, to integrate them so that we don't have duplication, right? And so that we generate collective impact. And so there's a huge opportunity there. And so, that was really the foundation of the community well-being and safety strategy. We took all of this information to our stakeholders, which included the different levels of government and various reps from Children's Services, Alberta Health Services, Justice, and Solgen. We had post-secondary there, secondary schools. We had virtually every social service provider in Lethbridge there. We had the police there. And we gave them all this data and said, okay, shoot holes in it. And help us create a strategy to address our social issues. And we landed on the community well-being and safety strategy. And it was co-created with the community, not by Marty, not by the city, but truly co-created with the community. And it's based on 4 key principles. The first principle is individual well-being. And at the foundation of that is we spend all this money on all those programs and services, and we focus on funding the program and not the person in the middle. And we have to almost do a bit of a refocus and say, we need to focus on the person in the middle. So if it's Alan Friesen in the middle, we need to do a thorough assessment on Alan and address and develop a plan to help him with his justice policing problems, his homelessness, his addiction and mental health, his primary health, his physical health. Does he need transportation? Does he need education, right? Do we need to have trauma-informed counseling to help him address some of those hurts from the past, all with the goal of achieving well-being? Okay, so we need to make sure that's foundational. The second key principle was system planning and integration. We need to take all of those programs and services and dollars in our community, and we need to do purposeful system planning and integration of those resources to make sure we don't have duplication, to make sure we're getting a return on investment, that there is performance management and accountability with these dollars. To think of it as a dragon boat racer. When you have everybody rowing together at the same time, how much collective impact you'll generate, which is the third principle, is collective impact. That if we can employ system planning and integration, focus on individual well-being, and we will generate collective impact, which means we need a shared common vision. We need to make sure that our efforts and our work are that we're working together, that we're rowing together, that we're not duplicating. And we need to make sure that at the end of the day, the fourth principle was community governance. So what we heard loud and clear when we did our needs assessment, we don't want the city hiring a bunch of people to deliver the social programs. Okay? We simply want you to be the facilitator, the convener of this movement. Okay? We need you, the city, to take a leadership role to bring these pieces together. And again, we can't expect the Alberta government or the federal government to dip in and do that for us. And in the absence of a leader, one shall rise, and it's often not the one you want. And so if we don't take a leadership role, well then, who's going to do that work? So, but what we also heard loud and clear was, City of Lethbridge, we don't want you to be the decision maker. You can coordinate this and put that backbone support in place, but you need to bring the right stakeholders together for a community governance body to help make the decisions. Okay? The City of Lethbridge is not the decision maker. So those are the 4 concepts of the well-being and safety strategy. And so we started internally with the dollars that we have, and we pooled those resources together. Instead of doing 5 or 10 different procurement processes to allocate that money, we did one. We created a community governance table to come together and help us allocate those dollars, which we did in November, and we went live in January with the new contracts. And now with those contracts, we're implementing robust performance management and benchmarks to ensure there's accountability for those dollars spent. And it's about helping those organizations be the best that they can be but also making sure, like any investment we make, we want a return for our investment. And so there's got to be a level of accountability for those government dollars, and to ensure that we're moving the needle on social issues. So
Hey, Marty, Kate,
it's a lot of work.
Millie Kate has some comments for us in the chat. And, when you're talking about like kind of the goals associated, she's saying most recovered city question mark as a goal, mental health wise, physical wealth wise, economic wise. That's a pretty interesting type of a way to frame it, right? We have the biggest opportunity for growth because we have huge problems here, right? No question. Another comment, and you already mentioned this, is that it starts with the individual and helping life, and then we do that enough times, our community is that much stronger for it, that we have a whole bunch of people and a ripple effect that we help Mary or Moses or Jerry or whomever, and then there's 10 people that get help because one person gets helped. Would you agree with that?
So I want to reflect a bit on a few of the comments in that. Yeah, we have a huge opportunity in Lethbridge. We do have a lot of problems, which means we have a lot of opportunity for growth. Now, don't get me wrong, this is a great city. There are a lot of cities in the same situation we are. Okay, I mean, I think as a city, we're just taking an initiative to identify the problem and start working on it. A lot of municipalities are just ignoring it. They're not doing the needs assessment. They're not uncovering it. And let me give you an example. We have a high domestic violence rate. Well, before we're too critical of that, Lethbridge has been, and our police service have worked very, very hard in our community to recognize domestic violence as a problem, to address it, to help uncover it and solve it. Well, if you hide it as a community and ignore it, you're going to have a low domestic violence rate because no one's going to talk about it, and the police aren't going to investigate it. So when you bring it to light, all of us, and people start coming forward, all of a sudden, we got a huge domestic violence rate. Well, it's part of that is because we're addressing the issue and we're bringing it to light. But at the end of the day, we're all going to be better off. And so, there's a lot of communities with social issues and homelessness, but, at least we're trying to address it here.
Definitely. And, when you go back about when we were originally talking, the number of homeless in our community, the number of in poverty, the number that are in poor health, the number of people that have substance abuse problems, those kind of things, all of those relate back to a cause. Do they not, Marty?
They do. And, at a very, very high level, it's ACEs, for adverse childhood experiences. And so one of the things we did in our community, in our city, as we did this research, is we recognized Lethbridge appears to have a very high substance abuse and addiction problem. So city council tasked administration and said, why? And first of all, do we? Or is this just anecdotal information, right? And so we did a very, very in-depth study that I emailed to you tonight that you can share with your viewers. It's a great read, very evidence-based, just a great paper. I didn't do it. I don't have the brains to do it. These are done by a bunch of doctors, okay? But ultimately, at the end of the day, a key foundation piece that they determined, and I'm going to read some stuff because I have the paper right in front of me. There is a powerful, persistent correlation between a high ACE score experienced and the greater chance of poor outcomes later in life, including dramatically increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, depression, mental health issues, substance abuse, smoking, poor academic achievement, time off work, and early death. Okay, so what it's saying is a high ACE score means more social problems. Okay,
A tougher life for the individual, and collectively more social problems for all of us, right? That's
for
the
the whole community.
Yeah, definitely.
So the one in there that keeps me up at night is the addiction and substance abuse, because I've seen it firsthand that, addiction and substance abuse has this huge ripple effect. Okay, it's the number one cause of homelessness. Okay, and so think about it, and it will cause and create more poverty, more homelessness, more domestic violence. It's a huge ripple effect. And so, as a city and an administrator, I want to find out, why do we have such a high substance abuse and addiction rate? And so again, if you read that study, it's very conclusive in that, again, just to back up to the ACEs study, I'm not going to go into the details of ACEs, but for those of our viewers that aren't aware of it, there was a groundbreaking study conducted in 1995 by the Center for Disease Control and the Kaiser Health Organization in California, and they founded the ACEs program. And they referred to 3 specific kinds of adversity children faced in the home environment. And the various forms were physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And the key findings of the studies, again, indicate that there is a powerful and persistent correlation between the high ACE score and all those problems I talked about. And the one that keeps me up at night is the correlation between a high ACE score and drug and substance abuse, which is really very predominant in Lethbridge.
Gabor Maddie, Dr. Maddie says that if you have an ACE score of 6 or greater, you have a 4,600% more chance of being an IV drug user. Like,
that's staggering.
It is incredible. Yes.
And so people wonder why. They think, well, why do we have all of these people, doing drugs? And like, it's a choice. Well, I've got news for you. No, it's not. For the first 50 years of my life, and my entire career was in justice, policing, post-secondary. I knew what ACEs was. And I knew about the Truth and Reconciliation report and the woes of the Indigenous, but I got to tell you, I didn't pay any attention to it. For most part, I blew it off. But over the last 3 years, I have been able to do tremendous research and be exposed and to educate myself on all of these other pieces. And I got to tell you, I wish I would have known this 30 years ago. I mean, it's staggering to me that the research is all there. And so when you talk about Lethbridge, yes, we have a high Indigenous population and we border the largest reserve in Canada. But the research done on the residential school issue and the correlating ACE scores, the data is very clear. Our Indigenous friends who have been in residential schools have an average ACE score of 6.
Yeah, and just for our viewers, ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, it's not like you crash your bike and you skin your knee when you were trying to learn your bike, or that you were picked last on a sports team or something. It's not that. It's more severe than that. It is seeing your mother get beat, or having somebody die in the home, or having people go to jail. They're severe type of situations. And our First Nations folks have 6 generations of that piled on, because for 150 years we've been trying to beat the culture out of them, right? So that's the reality of it.
So let me just read you a couple things out of that report. Compared to the general population, Indigenous people are more likely to experience adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, including abuse, neglect, and household substance abuse. And based on evidence published about childhood experiences within the residential schools, the average ACE score of a residential school survivor is at least 6. Given the majority report emotional, physical, and sexual abuse by staff and clergy at the schools, emotional and physical neglect, including systematic malnutrition and forced removal from their families to an institution. Alberta had the most residential schools. They had 26, at least, they had 130 residential schools in Alberta.
130. Wow.
Yeah, so at least 26 of the roughly 130 across the country, from the 1870s to the mid-1990s, the Lethbridge region alone had 8 residential schools operating between 1884 and 1975. And so, think about it. And this was kind of hard this is how I had it explained to me by one of our Blackfoot friends. He was teaching me, he said, listen, the Blackfoot Confederacy, a very large confederacy that extended all the way from the Red Deer River up north, all the way down into Montana, I believe into Wyoming, very large area, with a population in excess of 200,000 Plains Indian, the Blackfoot Confederacy. They've been carbon dated back to at least 10,000 years. Now, some folks say as far as 16,000 years. So think about it, Alan. You had this group of people that lived, let's go conservative in the middle, say that lived and existed for 10,000 years. Okay, they had their own system of law, government, healthcare. Amazing. I went on a teepee camp and I learned some of the history. I was just blown away on their medical system that they had and the healthcare system from plants and trees and bark and animals. Like, it was just unbelievable. Everything from mosquito spray to heart medicine. So for 10,000 years, they existed in peace. Okay. They had wars and they had fights, but they had their own system of government. But the land was pristine. Okay. And all of a sudden, 200 years ago, compared to 10,000 years, the Europeans come over and their first inclination is, well, we have to conquer. And conquer means to kill. And they tried, right? We've heard all the stories, but I mean, can you imagine the Brits coming over, the Europeans banging their drums and, marching in with if the Plains Indians up in the hills were probably going like, this is crazy. And they plucked them off like it wasn't even competition. So that didn't work. So they figured, okay, well, let's try and poison them. And they brought in all kinds of disease like smallpox, which, because they had never experienced that, it was a European disease. They didn't have an immune system like the pandemic, and it wiped them out, killed 80% of their population. Now, I may have some of my data off a bit, and I hope I don't offend any of my Blackfoot friends. I'm just doing this by memory, how it was explained to me. But smallpox killed a great percentage of these folks. But it didn't wipe them all out, right? Like anyone, the strong survive. And then they said, well, let's kill their food source. Let's kill all the buffalo. Okay, that didn't work. And then they said, okay, well, let's use malnutrition, right? And they starved them to death, right? And, they killed the buffalo and they eventually started beating them down, giving them liquor, which, again, was not part of their system. So it really wreaked havoc on their system. And it did wear them down to the point where they signed the treaties. They gave up and they said, okay, and they signed the treaties. But think about it. You had these people that lived all over North America, and we put them into a small pen called a reserve. And we put them in there and said, you have to stay there. You can't come out.
Got to
Right?
get an Indian agent. A white guy's got to write you a note that you can go off this
Yeah.
reserve, right?
And I'm saying, like, I'd be going, this is my land. And I can't even, like, so I come from a family of 13. Okay. If you put me in the same house as my 7 brothers and all my sisters, I guarantee you within a couple of weeks, there'll be shots fired. Okay. Would there be, and would I start drinking? Yeah. you know, like when you put people in a small area like that, it's not a shock that you're going to have problems and you can't come out. And
But
that,
surely, Marty, the First Nations people got the best lands, the most choice lands, right?
yeah, sure.
No, of course not.
If you look today, the Plains Indians owned all of North America, and now on the reserves, they have about 1% of the land. Anyways,
Yeah.
so then they figured, well, we'll just pen them up in a reserve and not let them come off, and eventually they'll go away. Well, that didn't work. And so they figured, okay, well, this isn't working. So our prime minister at the time said, what if we beat the culture out of them? What if we take their kids away? The parents, they're gone. Forget about them. Okay, they'll just die. But what if we go in and take their kids away and raise them to be white people? So can you imagine, Alan, how many kids do you have?
Just one. Just one.
Well, I have 2. And I'll tell you what, if the government came in and said, Marty, we're going to take your kids away and we're going to raise them right because we don't like the way you raise, I tell you what, good luck, buddy, because you're going to have to do it over my dead body. Okay, like and so you wonder. So you take their right away to raise their children, and the children that are taken away are abused sexually, physically, emotionally, and you wonder why. Why I tell you all this? You wonder why they have high ACE scores.
No kidding. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, and so you wonder why. And we know the correlation, whether you're Indigenous or not, we know the correlation between a high ACE score and drug and substance abuse. So what do we have to do? Well, we have to address the trauma, right? We if we're going to do this right, we have to we somehow have to have trauma-informed care to address that addiction and mental health. And that goes back to the community well-being and safety strategy about achieving individual well-being. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. When I first was told about residential schools, I dismissed the person that they didn't know what they're talking about. And
So did I.
Yeah. Later on, when
it scoffed and said, "You're crazy. Who cares? Get over." I used to say, "Get over it.
Yeah.
Move on."
Yeah. But man, the more I understand about it, the more I cannot believe that our ancestors were Canadians. Like we're so like I would never said a Canadian would do something like that, right?
Yeah.
And that's maybe saying, well, like why would anybody, right? Like it's not just we're not the only people to keep our treat our Indigenous people poorly, but we certainly made a very concentrated effort to beat the culture out of them and end them as beings around in our world, right?
And so there's a lot of those residential school survivors that are living here with us today. And if you can get them to open up, okay, it'll break your heart. And now most people tell me they want me to get an ultrasound to make sure I have a heart.
Yes.
But I'm telling you, that probably had the biggest impact on my life, and I'm a crusty old bugger, is the way we've treated our Indigenous Blackfoot friends. And for the first 50 years of my life, I completely dismissed it as, it's all about choices. Get over it, right?
Exactly.
Move on. But now that I learn about it and have educated myself, I feel guilty.
Yeah, no, I can understand that, because the whole ACEs trauma, it's just like, one or two, that's a challenge and you get over it. But 3 or 4 or 6 or 8, like, it's just overwhelming, right? A person just becomes where they cannot think, they cannot learn, they cannot form relationships, right? If you're that stressed and that encumbered by that much trauma, you just cannot function anywhere
Yeah.
close to your best, right? So
And and so the work you're doing about educating people on ACEs is so important. Now, I know I've talked about the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Indigenous folks and how they have been especially inflicted by ACEs, but it happens to anybody, right? It could happen to any family, any person, but the outcome is the same. Okay, that if you don't address that trauma, you will experience problems later in life. One of your previous guests was a fella, I believe, out of Texas or somewhere down south,
Dr.
and
Williams.
he was a medical doctor, and he was sexually abused, and I mean, and how it rippled out in his life, and so, but he still had a lot of opportunities in life, to do well, but there's a lot of folks out there that are living in poverty that don't have the opportunity to address that trauma and those high ACE scores course, and it's a vicious circle, and it goes on to the next generation.
Right.
and
Our
and
the
so
community, our community right now, its level of sickness, level of addiction, level of crime are because of what happened probably 20 years ago,
yeah,
mostly about that kind of a time frame, right? The differences we're trying to do now are, or we're going to see results, but it's going to be more, it's going to be a cumulative thing. And that's when we're going to really see the results, is in 10 and 15 and 20 years,
yeah.
right?
And that was another thing we learned in our needs assessment and our strategy is Lethbridge, like most communities across Canada and North America, we spend most of our dollars on the emergency response, right? We wait for it to become an absolute emergency before we put dollars to it, right? So the supervised consumption site is it's a perfect example of an emergency response. It's that last ditch effort, really simply to keep somebody alive for one more day to make, to get into that addiction continuum of care. We've somehow got to get ahead of it, and so that we're preventing ACEs, dealing with the trauma so they don't use drugs, so that we don't need a supervised consumption site, because we're spending all those millions of dollars on the emergency response, and we need to get ahead of that, and it's easier said than done.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. But that's going upstream, right? That's going, if we could start to reduce those experiences for little people in our world, they're going to have better lives for the rest of their lives, and our community is going to be a way stronger thing for it as well. So, in terms of the health costs, in terms of the monetary, the cost, it's huge. The best investment you can make is on keeping little people safe. Heckman, that's the guy
Bingo.
who says it. So I'm with him. So, and now also, did you read, Marty, that or did you take that course, that brain story certification course?
Yes.
Yes.
Great course. I recommend it. I told all my staff they have to take it. I advise anybody, not just anybody working in this field, to take it. I encourage everybody and anybody to take it. It's a free course, and it talks about brain development, and it talks about that brain story of childhood development, and the positive impacts that can occur with good development, and the negative impacts from things like the ACEs, the trauma, the adverse childhood experiences. So great course.
Yeah, I love it. It's through the Alberta Family Wellness Institute, free course, beautiful course. You'll learn tons with it. But one thing that I've been coming back to recently about it was that in that course, they talked about the traditional First Nation ways to develop a child, right? That here's
Right.
the markers at age 4, they were going to become part of this society, and here's their kind of their tasks. And at age 8, so there was like a developmental type thing, right? And also the environment they had is who experts like Dr. Bruce Perry would say that is how a child's supposed to be raised, like with 2 or 3 adults or aunties or older siblings who are looking out for the little person, right? So like that's those, it seems to me that some kind of a resurrection of their ways, the First Nation ways, would be healing for First Nation kids, but would be healing for all kids. Is kind of the way I'm thinking. But I don't know the details. You probably know more because you're maybe got better connections with the First Nations community than me.
So I'm going to take you back to that piece where I talked about the history of the Blackfoot Confederacy in the 10,000 years.
Yeah, sure.
And their own system of law, healthcare, education, childhood development. I mean, it was second to none. Like, I'm not an expert on their system, but what I know, if you can do something for 10,000 years and the outcome is almost 100%, like, you're doing something right. And so what amazed me was what you talked about, and you pick any topic: healthcare, social development, as far as the child development. They had their holistic way of educating, developing a child. And 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 now we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars on our school systems and our post-secondary systems, and I would argue the outcomes are sketchy at best. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, I challenge you, who's right and who's wrong? Like,
Yeah.
when you look at their system, it worked,
Yeah.
you know? And what we've so often tried to do is we've tried to take our Western European colonialized ways and force them on their system. Well, it probably should have been the other way around.
Yeah, we would have been better off for it for sure. Yeah.
And so if we would have listened to them and learned from them and collaborated with them, can you imagine we probably wouldn't have the problems that we have today. But we didn't. We did the opposite. And I don't blame anybody. That was the way back then. And you know, it, it, they didn't know what they didn't know, right? I mean, they came to North America, and they obviously, the Europeans that came over did the best they could. I don't think they maliciously wanted this outcome. It's just what they knew. But the more I learn about the Blackfoot culture, their history, and their systems, it's amazing. It'd be quite intriguing. Their language, amazing language.
I'm trying to learn some Blackfoot, so I've been going
Yep.
on with the with there's what's his name, Bailey. Can't remember his last name, but anyways, he's teaching Blackfoot, and some of it
Yep.
is fascinating because one, as an example, the town of McGrath, the word that they used to describe that was hunchback, or man
Yep.
looking at the ground, because when the Indian agents would release them off the reserve to go trade with the guy in McGrath, he was an old hunched over guy who had a big like humpback. So that's what the town was named, because that's
Yeah.
what they dealt with to sell them hay, right? So
Yeah.
all right, that's interesting. So yeah, so it's quite interesting how they the names and the origins of the names. I can't pronounce any of it, but I try. But oh man.
So part of the work, as you know, we're trying to do in Lethbridge, and I'll just give you an example on addressing homelessness, right? And so we're creating a bunch of housing projects, and they're called supportive housing projects, where you house people, but you provide the support and care and guidance for them to achieve well-being. And so we did a lot of research, because the vast majority of the folks in Lethbridge living in permanent supportive housing are Blackfoot, we said, okay, why are we not trying to incorporate some of the Blackfoot ways into the design and delivery of those programs?
Sure.
And so,
Trauma specific and culture specific, right? Both,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
So, if anybody wants to see this in action and how effective it is, go to Ambrose House in Edmonton. Okay. So there's permanent supportive housing facilities all across Alberta, but 99% of them are delivered by a non-Indigenous organization, okay, using our, for lack of a better term, our Western white ways. You know, here's how you shall be housed, and here's how we shall take care of you, and you will get better. So I toured Ambrose House in Edmonton because I kept hearing about this amazing Ambrose House that is run. It's by the Cree Nation up there. And I went up to visit, and I took a bunch of people with me. I took Mayor Spearman, I took Blaine Higgins, I took a whole bunch of people with me. And it was quite a learning experience because the facility is designed by the Cree Nation. So they've got their smudging room and all of those pieces. And the healthcare, the staff, a lot of Cree people, and they've designed the programming, and they're delivering the program, you know, through the Indigenous ways. The outcomes are amazing. Okay. And they are taking some of the hardest to serve, most complex individuals with permanent brain damage, FASD, extensive medical and physical damages, mental illness, addiction, and they bring them in, and it takes about 3 months, but they implement the traditional laws of the land, and they stabilize them. It takes about 3 months, and then they get them into detox and treatment. And now, keep in mind, a lot of these folks have permanent brain damage. So even if you get them off addiction, they still have huge problems and issues. But then you see the before and after. And literally, when I took 2 groups up there, on both groups, the people that I took up, some of the folks were crying because they saw the outcome. And what they did is they addressed the trauma from their youth, and they achieved well-being. Now, for some of those folks, well-being was the fact that, you know, they weren't addicted anymore, because again, remember, they still have permanent brain damage, and some of their body and physical damages will never heal. But they were in the best state of well-being probably in their life, or for many years. And it was just amazing to see the before and after, you know, the file when they came in and what you would see after. And they're no longer, you know, in the community. They're no longer doing drugs. They're no longer stealing, and they're no longer, you know, using the emergency system and the ambulances. So that's what we're trying to do.
They benefited. They have a way better life. The community is a way better place as well, right? Like
Absolutely.
everybody's getting served with that.
And so what we're trying to do is replicate that model in Lethbridge. And we got funding from the province to build a 42-unit permanent supportive housing facility. And what we're going to do is we're going to design the building, the programming through the Blackfoot lens, and then have hopefully a Blackfoot organization, or at least partner with a Blackfoot organization to deliver the programming. Excellent. We have seen it be tremendously successful, and we want to replicate that model here in Lethbridge.
Yeah, it makes really good sense. Hey, you know, Marty and I, excuse me, Marty and I are chatting about ACEs and the devastating effect of ACEs if untreated. If there's intervention that happens, people can have good lives. There's a book by Dr. Bruce Perry called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And one of the stories is a boy who was raised as a dog, had this brain damage, and he couldn't talk, and he couldn't walk like a person because he'd been raised as a dog for years. And so using his neurosequential model, he figured it out and got the kid the care he needed, and the kid recovers, and he goes to like university, and he has relationships with people, and it's just this amazing recovery story from some scared little being that was throwing shit at everybody that would walk by and streaking like to have like a good life. So with the intervention, everything's possible. And with the right care and trauma informed care, and especially in our part of the world, that it is conducive with what's going to work for our Blackfoot people, our brothers and sisters of the Blackfoot Nation. Did you hear this about Dr. Bruce Perry coming here to do some work with Spear Chief? I think the First Nations folks, Spear Chief. Have you heard this?
I haven't, but I would be very interested to follow up on that.
Me too. I was talking to Tracy Harvey the other day. You know Tracy, right?
Yes.
And she's awesome. And she's like right up on top of this, very knowledgeable. I learn so much every time I talk to her. But anyways, when she was talking about that he was coordinating with some First Nations people here, and on that same topic that we were just talking about, incorporating a child development, child recovery, child resilience building type of a thing based on First Nation type principles, based on a kind of more holistic sort of an approach. So that's super exciting to me. I'm thinking that could have some real legs to it and make some big difference.
Well, I am glad to hear that. I'm going to follow up on that. It's most likely, I'm hoping it's being organized through our reconciliation Lethbridge committee, but at the very least I'm going to ask, and they will know what's going on, so that's great.
Yeah, I haven't researched it anymore. She made the comment, I made a note, and I just haven't had a chance to do any more research on it. But if you find something out, I'd appreciate it.
I will let you know.
Okay, sounds good.
The other quick piece I want to talk about is the addiction recovery continuum of care in Lethbridge. And it's about helping those who are addicted, of course, to stay alive, and then getting them stabilized and into detox, and then from detox into treatment, and then from treatment into recovery, and then hopefully achieving that well-being. And I'm happy to announce that there is an organization out of Calgary called Fresh Start. They're a well-renowned recovery-based treatment program, and Fresh Start has merged with our South Country treatment program, and they are in the process of implementing the Fresh Start model here in Lethbridge, which is very much focused on that trauma-informed care, that recovery focus. And so when they come in for that treatment, of course, they get them through detox and actual treatment to, get them off whatever addiction it is, whatever drug it is, or alcohol. But then the next step is a critical step. It's the recovery part. If you are addicted to drugs, or if you have a substance abuse problem, hopefully we can cure that. But if we don't address the root causes, you're going to just keep going back. And so it's about that trauma-informed care, that recovery piece that is so critical. And, that can take anywhere from 3 months to 3 years, depending on the individual. But it's about addressing that trauma so that they can achieve that well-being and then be as best as they can be within our community.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've never actually had the whole treatment. We haven't had all the steps ever in our city, have we?
No, we haven't. Well, I shouldn't say we haven't, but they have never, I don't think, been a real coordinated, streamlined approach. And so in the last, probably 2 years, we've now have that full system in place where Of course, we still have the overdose prevention site, which is run by Alberta Health Services now. It used to be Arches, but now it's been taken over by Alberta Health and Alberta Health Services, because it is important. You want to keep people alive. But there's a purposeful push, when they come there, to get them into detox. And so when an individual, uses a substance, then the first stop after that hopefully is our Intox program, which is brand new for Lethbridge. And what Intox is, of course, is, it's a place where you can safely sober up. So instead of the street, it's a place where you can go, where you can sober up, you can get the care and professional support you need to sober up. And it's in a program delivered by Alpha House. Now, there's that fine line between when they sober up and then when they go into withdrawals, right? And so, the trick is to get them, to convince them to go from intox or sobering up into detox, which is that 7 to 10 day detoxification process where you detox your entire body of that substance. Okay, it's a very painful journey, especially for opioids. But again, through professional care and support, they become detoxed. Well, once they're detoxed, if you put them back on the street, guess what? They're going to go right back to using substances. So the trick is to get them into treatment right away, which is now the Fresh Start program. And so we have the Intox program, we have the detox. We have now 3 detox programs in Lethbridge and area. And then we now have the treatment program, Fresh Start. And then from after they get out of treatment, they go into recovery housing, which that's a program that's a lot of people know that Streets Alive delivers. But there's a couple other groups that are, Fresh Start is going to start up a recovery housing program, and potentially a group out of Calgary called Oxford House. But right now, Streets Alive does do that work, and they do a great job. And then that recovery journey is so critical. And then, of course, after they get out of recovery housing, depending on the individual, they still may have permanent problems. They still may have permanent brain damage and physical damage. So, they may need some type of light support, wherever they live, so that they maintain that track. And so that whole continuum we now have in Lethbridge, and that's exciting.
That is exciting. That's great news. Hey, one other thing I thought you might find interesting too. I was chatting with our police chief, Shaheen, the other day, or maybe a week ago. Anyways, he has done the course, the Brain Story certification course, and he's getting all his officers to do the Brain Story certification course.
That is excellent.
Oh, I'm excited.
Excellent.
Yes.
And so Chief Medezadeh is working with the city with our administration right now on how can we partner and collaborate with the police service to, again, accelerate the implementation of the CWSS. So we're very excited to have him here. And so.
Yes, I think he's going to be a huge contributor to making our community. What was Millie's comment? The most recovered city. I think that's great. And Millie, excellent. I didn't understand what you're talking about wrestling lessons, but you're saying that as a treatment for substance abuse, wrestling lessons. I don't understand the dynamics of how that works, but it sounds very exciting. So
it's worth a shot.
Also, Marty referenced this report on addiction that he has sent to me. I put my email address in the chat. I'm easy to find, though. If you want a copy of that, then reach out to me and I'll make sure you get a copy of it.
It's a great read.
Good. Marty, I encourage you to carry on the very difficult task that you are working on. I think that the results are going to be huge for our city. Not immediate, but long term, we're going to see some amazing results.
Good stuff, and keep pushing ACEs.
Yes, sir. Okay, keep yourself well.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.